up, everybody? It is Alex from Heavy New York calling from Zoom again. This time we return with Simon of Nightmare. It is great to be able to talk with you. I can't believe it's been over 3 years since we spoke at NAMM 2020.
Hey, how's it going, man? Yeah, 3 long years.
Yep, and who would have thought? I think the world changed quite a bit since then, right?
I would say so for sure. A lot of things changed for us as well.
Yeah.
So I guess we got a lot of stuff to talk about.
Definitely. That being, we got the follow up to Cacophony of Terror. We're getting Deformity Adrift. Is this sort of like continuing in a similar vein from what we heard off of Cacophony of Terror, or is this meant to sort of signify in a way, like a new beginning for Nightmare in a way?
I would say it's hard to define it. I would say maybe a little bit of both. There are definitely a lot of elements to it that we are exploring more deeply than on the first album. Also, we welcomed a new band member in the meantime, which is our second guitarist, Keith Merrow, who played in Conquering Dystopia and some other projects. And so it was a more collaborative songwriting process from the get-go. And also, I would say, yeah, like I said, some of the influences we just kind of hinted at on the first album, we put those more in the forefront on this new one. So yeah, I think it could be a little bit of a transition piece. We definitely took some lessons from the songwriting process of this album that I think will play a larger role in the future.
Do you feel that the first four singles that we got so far, such as Hammer of Desolation and Brutalist Imperator and so on and so forth, is this like a good representation of what the whole album is going to sound like, or is that just a quick little taste of what is to come?
I would say so. I mean, we decided to do four singles this time, and we also tried to basically give a pretty broad stroke of what's happening on the album. You know, our first music video, Taufbefehl, obviously is pretty different to the rest of our material. So yeah, we just tried to give a really broad stroke of what's happening on the album.
Was there at all sort of like a vision that was in mind with the making of this? Was there sort of a preconceived idea, or with having a new member involved and having this be sort of like a transitional piece, this was a very improvisational, more or less sort of like experimental songwriting process?
It was just very different because the first album took us 3.5 years to write. And that was because a lot of it I had to do by myself in front of the computer. And then our drummer, Paul, would fly into the US to work with me for a couple of weeks. So we started the songwriting process. I did not write a single note by myself. We started it with Paul flying into the US. We worked for maybe 2 weeks. And then right after that, I flew over to here to Portland, Oregon, which is where I'm living now, and wrote the rest of the album with Keith. So the entire songwriting process only took 3.5 weeks versus 3.5 years for the first album. So I just feel it was just like just a whole different scenario. And I think what that allowed us to do is to maybe not mull over everything endlessly. I think that's something that happened with our debut album where I worked on that stuff for so long. I revisited parts for so long and so many times. And I think the result was a very homogenized record, which is what we wanted at the time. And with this new album, since the songwriting process was more compressed into a shorter amount of time, I feel like we took a couple more risks and ventured more heavily into certain influences rather than embedding them, in a more subtle manner. And so I think that's a major difference between both albums.
Moving to Portland, Oregon will definitely also add some flavor to the music, being the home of Agalok and Yob and Toxic Holocaust and so many other fantastic bands, on to others. Like, I think you're in the right city for Nightmare as well.
Absolutely, yeah. It's a good spot. We have, it's a cool city. Nature around here is amazing, and the climate certainly doesn't suck as much as in Florida. So I feel a lot more comfortable here.
Now, you don't miss the gators and the humidity and the hurricanes and all that.
Yeah, somehow I don't know.
Yeah. Well, hey,
Yeah.
you got to film your music video now on the top of Mount Hood, that dormant volcano that is in Oregon. You need to do a music video up there, and you'll be the greatest metal band in Portland.
Yeah, I feel like maybe one or another Portland band already had pretty similar ideas, so we'll see. We'll see what we're gonna do. But yeah, the two music videos we shot so far, Taufbefehl, for example, believe it or not, we were somehow led into a Masonic lodge here in Portland. We have zero connection to Freemasons. It was just we were just looking for a really weird location and found that one, and it just was a spectacular room. And I don't know, we just gave it a shot. We were just like, hey, can we shoot a music video in there? And they were just like, yeah, sure, just bring some shirts. And we're like, okay, cool, So yeah, but maybe we'll do something out in the woods or in the mountains. We'll see.
Being that like because you brought up a good point too, like with Cacophony of Terror, you worked on it in a 3 year time span, and it seems like Deformity Adrift, you were able to kind of like hit the ground running a lot more and sort of like not have to overthink it as much. And I'd imagine that is it fair to say that maybe as a result, Deformity of Drift sort of captures more of a moment in a way, whereas Cacophony of Terror was more or less kind of like an error or an era in your songwriting process.
I think you could say that for sure. It was we were very in the moment, and we just felt inspired, and it just because we also knew we had less time to write it. I think you just approach certain things differently. If you don't necessarily get to sit down with the same song over a long period of time, you're trying to basically put as much, I guess, meaningful material into that song in the time that you're given to write it. So yeah, I would say it had a big impact on the material.
Being the guitarist of the band, because I've noticed that a lot of bands that have this sort of atmospheric technical death metal sound that you have, which is truly extraordinary. I think you really bring your own sort of twist behind it. I think people who love Atheist or Cynic or Death can very much appreciate this, but people who love like Obscura or maybe like Inferi or Archspire could also appreciate this as well. But I noticed that with a lot of bands with this sort of sound, that there's usually conceptual elements that inspire the music as well. So as the guitarist, was certain like subject matters or certain concepts maybe help guiding your hand with regards to how the songs were made?
Honestly, not really this time. We really took it kind of song by song. We didn't really try to seek out a super coherent concept this time around. We just really let kind of the creativity flow and the inspiration flow as it came to us. And when it came to writing the lyrics, I'm also involved in writing the lyrics. I basically split that responsibility with our vocalist John. Um, you know, I would say some of the lyrics were inadvertently inspired by just current events or whatever. I remember we started writing lyrics for a song on the day the war in Ukraine started. So it was just all over the news, and without trying to, some of the, I think, imagery and I would say fear about nuclear war or whatever, like some of that imagery kind of seeped into some of those lyrics. Um, but there, yeah, but then we have other lyrics where we just let ourselves inspire by the cover artwork, for example, where we literally stared at the cover art and we're like, cool, what is this, what are we getting out of this artwork, what are we seeing, what is the story that we can build out of this.
Yeah, that artwork is truly fucking disturbing too, because like the sort of figurative nature behind it, I can't tell if like the corpse is like already just like an encasement of ashes where like the corpse is very static in a way, or if it's in the process of dying already. I think it almost, maybe I'm over interpreting it as an artist myself, but like I think it has a perfect interpretational element. Is this dying or is it already dead?
Honestly, there's no real answer for that. In my in my mind, it's more something. It's a figure or a disfigure, that is just heavily struggling and maybe in the process of dying. We don't know, but it's definitely in a lot of pain. Evidently, you could kind of tell.
As contributing to the lyrics, it's funny too because I interviewed Craig from Forbidden yesterday, and even though he's the guitar player for Forbidden, he does contribute a lot to the lyrics as well. When it comes to the lyrical aspect behind it, in a way, does your guitar playing and how you play maybe influence to how you write the lyrics? Is there any at all maybe a similar creative energy that's channeled into it, or are they two completely separate arts and two completely separate sides of your creative process?
I would say they're two different sides for sure. Since it's just a very collaborative effort between John and I, and for some reason, John and I just really have a great connection when it comes to writing lyrics. We're usually able to cook them up pretty fast. We kind of land on a topic or on a theme, and then it could be really fast. Like sometimes we write an entire song's worth of lyrics in 20 minutes, and then we kind of start. What we usually do is we write the lyrics and immediately start recording vocals too. So it's kind of like there's a little bit of back and forth where the process, or where some of the lyrics are also determined by how they fit over the song or whatever. So sometimes you write a really long, piece of lyrics, and it won't fit in the song, and then we have to make, creative decisions as to what to cut, or can we, make more than one set of lyrics out of it or whatever. So it's like a very fluid process. Whereas I think the songwriting process on guitar is a bit more. It takes quite a bit longer for sure.
Yeah. When it comes to like the music in itself, in a way, whether it will be lyrically or instrumentally, does your personal life or your own personal experiences also play a role in it, or are you trying to maybe use Nightmare as more of an escapism from your average daily lives?
I would say it's a little bit of both. I think it's inevitable that certain, personal experiences and thoughts seep into the lyrics or into the material. You know, Obviously, maybe some darker thoughts or whatever, but it isn't always that conscious. I feel like a lot of it kind of happens subconsciously, where you kind of like, what I was just mentioning about the war in Ukraine, where you don't set out to do something particular, and then all of a sudden, once you're done, you're able to connect the dots of what you were doing, and you kind of, it makes sense, and you find these connections into your personal life or into whatever's going on around you.
Mm. Yeah, this is like a debate I like to have with artists, in a way, and in a way you kind of just answered it, but I wanted to expand on it a little bit more because, like, do you believe inspiration really is something that can be sought out? Can you actually look for inspiration, or is it one of those things where it just kind of has to strike you, and that's when you end up having to use it? Because people say they feel inspired all the time, but people could feel inspired in a room in an office space where there's nothing exciting happening going on.
It's funny, a friend of mine just recommended a book to me that's called The War of Art. I just ordered it recently. I've yet to start reading it, but I think it is a little bit about that, or partially about that. Personally, I think it is rare that inspiration strikes out of nowhere. I think you have to put yourself in a certain mindset. And I have also made the experience, and that brings us back to some of the things that happened during the songwriting of Deformity Adrift. When we wrote the song Taufbefehl, for example, that song was there was like a very distinct purpose behind it. I basically said to my drummer, I was like, hey, I want to write a really primitive, stoic industrial song. And like, can we start with a really, really primitive beat, and we had a very specific idea of what we wanted, and then that idea was kind of inspiring, right? Because it was like such a narrow vision that we tried to instill in our sound, that we really went for it. And I think it was one of the more inspired feeling writing processes for the album, because of that. So I think you kind of have to put yourself in a mindset. And to me personally, it's rare that inspiration strikes out of nowhere. That's very, very rare.
When you work on something though for a long period of time, in a way, like as you did with Cacophony of Terror, is it hard to keep? Does it make it more difficult to sort of keep the idea inspiring, or keep the idea fresh, or just almost kind of maintain or capture that moment, if you will?
I think it can be, for sure. I think a long process can be demotivating to a certain degree sometimes because, inevitably it takes a long time because sometimes you just don't, you get stuck and you just can't get any further. And there were songs on Cacophony of Terror where half of the song was written, and then 2 years later I finally had an idea of how to finish it, right? But then that also means that that song was laying dormant for a very long time, so I would say it can be hard to keep that up. I think generally speaking, it's important to, and that's something I learned when we wrote the new album. I think it's important to figure out what you really, really want out of a song, rather than just trying to one up what you already did. I think because I feel like most artists, most musicians are like, okay, how do I do my thing but better than last time? And I don't think that's a very inspirational thought. I think if anything, it just creates pressure, because you're trying to do sort of the same thing but better. And I think that's not necessarily an inspiring place to start. And I think it's more inspiring to just kind of tell yourself, okay, this is the kind of song I want to write right now. That this is the kind of atmosphere I want to convey. This is the kind of dynamics I want out of this song. So I think the more specific you get, the easier it is to stay inspired.
Well, it's funny that you mentioned that too, because you don't want to have too much of a vision, as you say, but like, because in between Cacophony of Terror now, you also released the Monolith of Corrosion EP. So was that almost kind of like the bridge between the past and the present in a way, or was that sort of just like a one-off sort of like experimental process of Nightmare?
Um, I think it was kind of a bridge because that entire EP is an interesting example of doing exactly that, having a very, very specific vision of what you want out of a piece of music. And then it was inspiring to write these songs. And the specific concept for those songs was to start really, really fast. To basically to have three songs start really fast, chaotic, and intense. And then for like basically seamlessly flown to the next song, which was supposed to be a bit more mid-tempo and vibey, and then seamlessly flown to the last song, which was supposed to be very heavy and doomy. And then also throughout these three songs, the guitar tuning gets consistently lower. So that was the idea from the get-go. The entire EP was written around that musical idea. And then again, I feel like the songwriting came to me a lot more easy because the idea was so specific. You set yourself certain limits, and then you have to work within the constraints you set yourself. And somehow I feel like that made it easier for me rather than just trying to write three new Nightmare songs. You know what I mean?
Of course. And this year does also mark, in a way, technically 10 years of Nightmare, being that you guys originated in 2013. I know you didn't release the first EP till 2016, but like the evolution that that has occurred, because when you look at the first CP and you compare it to now with Deformity Adrift, there was like an evolution. Is it fair to say that throughout your 10-year career, are you sort of achieving, again, you don't want to have too much of a vision, as we said, but was this sort of maybe like the direction you were able to sort of foresee yourself going into 10 years ago?
I don't know. I think we really didn't overthink it that in that sense. I think I think our vision or our basic inspiration or mission for ourselves is really just to do what we do, and be really try to find inspiration in like different things, and not holding back on changing course if we want to, or not holding back on influences that are maybe unorthodox. The thing of it is, the genre that we operate in, and I think that's something we knew from the get-go, the genre we operate within is very open to experimentation. So it feels like we're not constrained by certain genre conventions or whatever. So I think that's a big point for us, because we do like trying very, very different things at times. And we're already basically talking about the next EP that we want to work on. And again, it's kind of going to be it's going to be heavily experimental in a different kind of way. And so I think that's really the the main thing for us, that we're able within this genre to experiment a lot, and it being embraced, by fans and listeners of the genre too.
Yeah. Are we gonna get some gentle love ballads from Nightmare anytime soon?
Probably not, but you never know. You never know what we're gonna cook up next.
Yeah, right. Again, never too many preconceived ideas, but it's interesting that you mentioned that too because I couldn't agree more. Like the whole sort of atmospheric technical death metal sound that you have really does. You could take elements like I've seen bands in your genre even bring like as things as out of the box as like EDM influences in their sound in a way. And I think that's extraordinary. A lot of people now would maybe assume that with the whole technical death metal thing, it consists of a lot of solos, a lot of blast beats. The lead guitar player probably doesn't have a headstock on his guitar or something like that, and the bass is they're doing hammer-ons on the bass in a way. But in terms of the sort of sound, and this is another question I like to ask bands: does everybody really need to be in the same emotional headspace when songwriting? Do all of you really need to sort of feel the same way, or could different opinions and different emotions maybe actually help enhance the already experimental sound?
I would say, since the songwriting process for the album was a little bit broken up, I was the only person that was basically present on both sides of the songwriting, right? I was there when our drummer flew into the US to work with me, and then I went over to write the rest of the album with Keith. And so both of those were really different experiences. But generally speaking, the songwriting process is pretty collaborative, and I think everyone's input is absolutely welcomed. And we wouldn't have Keith, for example. This is an interesting thing about Keith, and why we really like having him in the band too. So I would say a lot of his influences are similar to mine. However, because he has been a solo guitarist and artist for a long time, he has a very particular style of writing songs. And for him, it's kind of like he creates a lot of the stuff that I do with one guitar voice, right? And I have always written with two guitars in mind. So now the thing is like, sometimes we're able, when we come together to write something, it's almost like we're able with two guitars to writing process, where actually, now that we're all in the same region, we get to rehearse together, we get to write together full time. I think that'll definitely help adding another layer to the overall sound
Yeah,
of the band.
definitely. And I think when you have like a solo artist join up with a band, like one contribution I'm interested in is Jason Richardson when he joined All That Remains, and like he was already a solo artist and of a completely different style. To see him come into a metalcore band with that style is also going to be interesting. So to see like a solo artist contribute and having multiple songwriters in the band, because just because a band has 5 people doesn't mean that all 5 of them are writing the songs. So to have multiple
Right.
songwriters come in means that there's a lot more inventory you could sort of work with and create.
100%. And Paul is the same way. Paul doesn't only play drums; he's a multi instrumentalist. So him and I have always worked really well together when it comes to songwriting, because he thinks beyond the drums as well. So I think generally speaking, it's a pretty open process, songwriting process with Nightmare, and everybody's input is more than welcome. Just because I don't feel like I don't feel like by limiting it to A, I don't want to have the whole responsibility on my shoulders, and B, I don't think it would be fun for the rest of the band to not have that level of input.
Of course, definitely. So
Yeah.
before we go, I want to thank you so much for your time today, and great to catch up with you. I can't believe it's been over 3 years. Is there just anything else
Yeah.
with Nightmare that you'd like to promote with the release of Deformity Adrift, with this album coming out in May? Can we be expecting a U.S. tour coming soon and maybe a show in New York? We'd love to have you all here.
Well, we would love to play New York. We're actually currently preparing for 2 shows here in the region. We're going to be playing Portland and Seattle in May. And the other thing I would just like to mention is that the entire release of the album is a DIY effort this time around. We are releasing it on my label, Total Dissonance Worship, and every step of almost every step of the production of this album and the release, it has been done by a band member. Most of it was recorded by a band member, except for the drums. We did record the drums at an external studio, and we had it mixed somewhere else. But all of the recordings and yeah, it's just a very hands-on process. And when the album ships, it is packed by a band member, so it's a very, very direct process, and it's something we do enjoy doing. And I hope that that sense of connection translates to people who get it, that it's not some corporate fulfillment center, that you're getting your stuff from, or like a big corporate label. It's like a 100% hands-on experience where everybody in the band is deeply involved in every step of the process. So I hope that translates.
That's awesome. That's really cool. And I can even tell by the sound that it has the DIY charm behind it. And I think that's going to make a lot of unpackaging it a lot more of an experience. So thank you guys for that. But everybody,
Hopefully.
we are here with Nightmare. Be sure to check out Deformity Adrift when it comes out. This is Alex from Heavy New York, and we will see you next time.